So 9.3 is all about growth in plants. What you need to make sure that you do here is to connect the idea of growth to the number and the size of cells. So the number of cells is increased because of the process of mitosis. So you need to connect these ideas with mitosis. And also what we're going to look at is the impact of how a plant hormone can elongate a particular cell. So elongation of cells obviously makes them appear to look larger, which again is associated with growth. The essential idea here is that plants are adapted to growing to the best environmental conditions. So the environmental condition that underscores or is the most important to plants is light. So plants want to grow towards light, and one of the syllabus statements we're going to look at here is a phototropic response. Positive phototropic responses are growth responses which are towards the light. And obviously, if you're growing towards the light, you're optimizing the light that can be absorbed for photosynthesis. You're optimizing the amount of organic material that can be produced. And the more organic material that you've got, then the more glucose, the more respiration, you've got more energy for growth. If you've got glucose and you're also taking up nitrates, then you can also produce amino acids. So you've got here this idea that plants are adapted towards growth of the environmental conditions, and principally what we're going to be looking at here is the effect of light. You can also think about water and plants adapting their growth of roots and growing towards the water. So geotropic responses are responses which are influenced by gravity, and it's usually in the same direction of gravity that you want the roots to grow downwards. So again, that would be a growth response to environmental condition. The reason that you've got this diagram down here is that this is showing topiary, and topiary is when man deliberately manipulates the growth of plants to cause all different sort of shapes and sizes, so we're pruning it. But what we're going to look at is the natural growth response to different environmental conditions. And here we've got a lot of syllabus statements. And just to unpack and underscore a few things which I want you to look at carefully with these before we dive into the presentation proper. Meristematic tissue, which is mentioned here, is really a stem cell. So stem cells in animals, the equivalent in plants is called meristematic tissue. And meristematic tissue, like stem cells, have got the ability to divide by mitosis repeatedly, and meristematic tissues are undifferentiated. That means they're unspecialized. All of the genes are switched off and they're ready to become specialized along different routes. Meristematic tissue in plants is found at the shoot apex, the top of the shoot, which can grow upwards, the root apex, allowing the root to grow downwards, and we're also going to look briefly at cambium, and meristematic tissue in cambium allows the plant to increase its girth, so it can grow fatter, if you like. And we're going to look at the role of cork cambium as well, which is in the production of bark. We're going to come to that. But all of this growth is associated with auxin, which is a plant hormone. So plant hormones are controlling the meristematic tissue. They're controlling both the rate of mitosis, and they're also controlling how plants will then differentiate to become specialized. Auxin is the plant hormone, and very much like a steroid hormone, it has a direct influence on changing gene expression. When we meet auxin, I want us to connect also the idea of an auxin efflux pump with what we already know about a pump. A pump is moving something up a concentration gradient, which means it's active transport. Pumps are found in membranes, so all the ideas of the fluid mosaic membrane and the effect of that mosaic being a protein molecule, in this case it's a pump. We're going to also look at the effect of auxin and what we know about auxin, allowing man to manipulate the growth of plants. And in particular, we're going to look at the micropropagation. I've asked Harry to dip into this, and he's going to help us to understand a little bit more about micropropagation. But micropropagation allows us to produce large numbers of genetically identical individual crop plants, valuable crop plants. It can also produce things like orchids, which are extremely valuable and difficult to grow. Micropropagation can also be used to produce virus-free strains of plants. So I think if you look through those syllabus statements, I've hit on some of the key terminology there, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more in the following slide. So here we're looking at the syllabus statement, which says undifferentiated and specialized cells in the meristems of plants, in the plant's stem cells, if you like, allow indeterminable growth. That means that plants can grow all the way through their life, unlike animals, which when they hit adulthood obviously stop growing. If we look at this part here, it says mitosis and cell division in the shoot apex provides cells needed for the extension of the stem and the development of leaves. So the extension of the stem, first of all, so we've got the shoot apex here. This is at the top of the plant, and if this undergoes mitosis, what we got is more cells, and we've got an increase in the height of the plant here. I just want to jump to this part. This is actually a root, and the root apex also has meristematic tissue, and the root apex will divide, allowing that root to grow downwards. And again, both of these are at the apical regions. These are apical meristems, which are found in plants. If we look over here, we can see cells of that plant, and we can see that some of them are small, some of them are elongated. And we come back to this idea of elongated and small cells later on. I also want you to think about what we know about mitosis and consider what we know about the mitotic index and the calculation of the mitotic index. So the higher the mitotic index, the faster the rate of mitosis, which means that we have more cells in a particular region. And if you recall, what we did in year 12 is a root squash. We did some garlic. We squashed the roots, we stained the root, and we looked at the mitotic index calculation at that stage. So again, link this to the prac work that we've done previously. The next slide is a continuation, and what we see here is the apical meristem here. The apical meristem produces mitosis, which allows that to elongate and grow upwards. If you look down here, what we've also got is an auxiliary bud, and what can happen is that can also has meristematic tissue, and what can happen is that can allow growth laterally, sideways, allowing the plant to become a little bit more bushy. Now, generally, the apical meristematic tissue will produce a hormone to inhibit the growth down here, because generally, not necessarily always, it's better to grow upwards and outcompete other plants for light. But sometimes what can happen is that you don't want that to take place. You want growth more sideways. So generally here, apical meristematic tissues will produce a plant hormone that turns off and inhibits the meristematic growth at this region here. And apical dominance causes the elongation upwards of that particular shoot. If you cut off this apical meristem, or if this apical meristem receives no light, what can then happen is you remove apical dominance. This meristematic tissue becomes uninhibited, and this can grow sideways. You can also do this deliberately, manipulating the plant to get bushier, to grow sideways, by either cutting off this shoot tip, which is what some gardeners will do to make plants look round and bushy, or you can use different plant hormones, which will again cause this growth in the meristem at the auxiliary bud. So generally, we got meristematic tissues here growing upwards to the shoot and inhibiting the growth here. And because we inhibit the growth here, that's why there's no side branch between this nodal region and this nodal region. So this internode, this big long increase in growth here, is a consequence of apical dominance from this particular part of the plant up here. Down at the bottom, we've got the roots. And again, we've got meristematic tissue at the roots, allowing the roots to grow downwards. So we've got apical meristems at the root tips. We've also got apical meristems at the roots, and then we've got these auxiliary buds, which allow sidewards movement when inhibition is removed. And here what we've got is the idea that cambium, which is the tissue which lies in between the phloem and the xylem, cambium is also meristematic. And cambium, when it undergoes cell division, will then become specialized to become what's called secondary xylem and secondary phloem. And secondary xylem and secondary phloem cause the annual rings of a plant. If you've got a larger tree and you cut it open, you can see these annual rings, and the annual rings are caused by the production of secondary xylem in particular. Also, secondary phloem is there, and that is a consequence of cambium and meristematic tissue in the cambium. In some plants, woody plants, we've also got this cork cambium region, and the cork cambium region will undergo cell division to produce bark, so the outside parts of woody plants, is caused by the cork cambium undergoing mitosis. And this slide is bringing us on to the idea that all of this mitotic division is controlled by plant hormones. Auxin is a collective term for many different types of hormones which are found in plants. And you can see this long list here that they do all sorts of things. They allow root and shoot growth. And this one is starred because this is what we need to really appreciate for 9.3. But auxins are also involved in flowering in angiosperms. Remember, angiosperms are your flowering plants. So auxins control flowering in long day and short day plants. We're coming on to that later on. Auxin also causes fruits to develop, and ethene is a type of auxin which can be secreted to increase the development of the fruit, which some of you did for your internal assessments. Also, auxin is important for leaf development and in wound response. And plants are wounded either by grazing animals or sometimes by viruses. So hormones are a collective term. Auxins is a collective term rather for hormones, and they're molecules produced in one part of the organism and then transported to another part. So connect the idea of a plant hormone and the similarities here that we've got with an animal hormone. The animal hormone being transported in the bloodstream, and we'll look in a moment about the one particular type of hormone and how that's transported. And then we've got this statement. It says plant shoots respond to environmental conditions by tropism. And in particular, they're going to grow towards light. So we've got a phototropic response, a positive phototropic response. But remember that they can only grow, they can only do cell division in certain parts, meristematic parts. And the meristematic part lies at the growing shoot, and it lies in a region called the coleoptile. So the coleoptile said here is something, it's a sheath really that's produced at the tip of the growing shoot. And here's where we've got the meristematic tissue. So if plants receive light just from one direction, what's going to happen is that they're going to grow in this direction. And if they grow in this direction, as you can see here, that means that there must be more cells and more elongated cells in this side of the plant. So what we've got here is positive phototropism, growth towards the light. So if light is unidirectional, auxin is going to be distributed equally all the way through this meristematic tissue, and the meristematic tissue is all going to undergo mitosis at a rate which is the same, which allows the growth to go upwards. If auxin is, if the light is coming just from one direction, you've got unidirectional light, what happens is the auxin is going to be moved away from the light, and the auxin moves to the shaded or dark side of the plant. That means that the dark side of the plant, this side here, is going to receive more auxin, and it's auxin which is promoting cell division and cell elongation. So when light comes from one direction, auxin physically moves across the tissue of the meristem, and it causes more growth in the dark side, which allows this elongation effect here and phototropism. We've got positive phototropism, positive because it's growing towards the light, and that's caused by an unequal distribution of auxin. So it's auxin, remember, that is making that cell divide and making the cells undergo elongation. We've also got here gravitropism, and I can't even say that, is like geotropism, and that is a response towards gravity. So in this case, if the shoot is growing straight upwards, or even if it's going in this direction, it's growing against gravity. So we say that that's a negative geotropic response. And that also is to do with plant hormones, but what we need to appreciate is the light and phototropic responses. Now, going back to this idea here, in order for this effect to come about, we need to appreciate that the actual plant tissue must be sensitive to the fact that light is present. So they've got a receptor, specialized cells which can detect light. And if you can detect something, then you can respond to it. And the response is mediated by auxin, this plant hormone that causes it is unequal distribution. It comes to this side and it causes that positive phototropic response. And the next syllabus statement, it says